On February 23, 1995, a 28-year-old trader boarded a plane out of Singapore, leaving behind a note that said, "I'm sorry." He left behind 827 million pounds in hidden losses, more than double what his entire bank had in the vault to cover it. Within just 4 days, that bank was gone. Not damaged, not restructured. Gone completely, wiped off the map of British finance forever. This wasn't some obscure, forgettable regional lender that nobody outside the banking industry had ever even heard of. This bank had financed the Napoleonic Wars. It had funded the Louisiana Purchase, the deal that doubled the size of the United States. It managed the personal accounts of the Queen of England herself, 233 years old. Older than the United States, it had survived the World Wars, depressions, and 2 centuries of financial crises. And one man brought it down in less than 3 years, using a trick so simple that a first-year accounting student would have caught it, if anyone had actually bothered to look. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly how he did it, why nobody stopped him for years, and the single number that ended it all. His name was Nick Leeson. In 1992, Barings Bank sent him to Singapore to run a small trading desk, one branch office in a global banking empire that stretched across continents. His job, buy and sell futures contracts, essentially bets on which direction a stock market index would move. Specifically, he was trading contracts tied to Japan's Nikkei 225, which functions as the country's overall stock market health score, similar to how the Dow Jones works in America. Here's the part that matters more than the trading itself, and it's the actual key to this entire story. In any properly run trading operation, 2 separate people handle 2 completely separate jobs. One person makes the trades, that's called the front office. A totally different person checks that those trades actually happened correctly and settles all the paperwork behind them, that's the back office. Barings gave Nick Leeson both of those jobs simultaneously, an arrangement that should never have been allowed in the first place. He was the trader making the bets, and he was also the one person responsible for checking his own work afterward. Think of it like being both the student taking an exam and the teacher grading it. Nobody's independently checking if you got the answer right. You simply decide for yourself. And Leeson had already secretly built himself an escape hatch months before he actually needed one. A hidden place to bury anything that went badly wrong, waiting quietly in the background. He quietly created something called an error account, numbered 88888, the number 8 considered especially lucky in Chinese culture. Error accounts are a completely normal, boring part of trading operations. They're a temporary parking spot for small, honest mistakes, the wrong number of shares typed in, a trade accidentally booked to the wrong client, and they're supposed to get cleared out every single day. Leeson turned his into something else entirely. Every single losing trade he made, instead of being reported honestly, got quietly buried inside account 88888, completely out of sight, hidden from everyone in London. Then he simply sent London a clean report showing only the winning trades. On paper, everything looked flawless. In reality, an entire second set of books was quietly accumulating disaster underneath it. By the end of 1992, the hidden account was already 2 million pounds in the red. A year later, that number had grown to 23 million pounds. By the end of 1994, 208 million pounds, and Barings' senior management back in London still had absolutely no idea any of this was happening. Here's exactly how he managed to pull that off for so long. In 1994 alone, Leeson fabricated 28.5 million pounds in fake profits on paper. His bosses were thrilled with the numbers. They genuinely believed they'd discovered a rare trading prodigy. He earned a 130,000 pounds bonus on top of his 50,000 pounds salary and lived accordingly, a Singapore apartment costing $9,000 a month. Warning signs did exist the entire time for anyone paying attention. An internal memo sent directly to Barings' CEO in November of 1994, 3 months before the final collapse, literally stated that the bank's, quote, systems and control culture are distinctly flaky. Internal auditors had specifically flagged in writing that one man controlling both trading and settlement functions at once was a serious structural risk. Barings kept him in the role anyway, because the fake profits he reported looked far too good to question. It's a pattern that shows up constantly in financial history. The moment someone appears to be making extraordinary money, the appetite to actually scrutinize how shrinks dramatically. Then, on January 17, 1995, a devastating earthquake struck the city of Kobe, Japan. The Nikkei, the exact index Leeson had bet heavily on recovering, dropped roughly 1,000 points almost overnight, catching markets worldwide off guard. Any rational trader takes the loss at this point and simply walks away to fight another day. Leeson did the exact opposite, and what he chose to do next turned one bad month into a completely unrecoverable catastrophe. He doubled down on the losing bet, hard, instead of cutting it. He bought even more Nikkei futures contracts, absolutely convinced the market would bounce back quickly and rescue his position. It never did. Every single additional contract he purchased just made the hole underneath him grow even deeper. By mid-February of 1995, Leeson personally held half of the entire open market in Nikkei futures contracts and a staggering 85% of the open interest in Japanese government bond futures. He wasn't quietly hiding inside the market anymore. At that point, he essentially was the market, and every other trader watching knew exactly how dangerously exposed he had become. Other traders could see his positions and trade against him, which only made his losses accelerate faster. On February 23, 1995, a settlements clerk finally spotted a discrepancy in the numbers that simply didn't add up. Leeson offered an excuse about needing to visit his wife at the hospital, and that same evening quietly boarded a flight out of the country. He left behind a note of apology and a full £827 million hole in the balance sheet, a number more than double what Barings actually had available in capital to absorb it. Just 3 days later, Barings Bank formally collapsed, insolvent, unable to meet its obligations. 233 years of banking history over in the span of a single week. The Dutch banking group ING then stepped in and purchased what little remained of Barings. The final sale price, after everything, £1, not £1 million, one single pound, because Barings' actual net value, once the losses were accounted for, had fallen well below zero. Nick Leeson was eventually tracked down, formally arrested, extradited all the way back to Singapore, and ultimately sentenced to 6.5 years in prison there. But the real lasting damage was never really about just one man's personal freedom. It was about how the entire global financial world was forced to fundamentally rethink risk. A single prison sentence was never going to undo what had already happened to a 233-year-old institution. Regulators across the world used the Barings collapse as the case study to rewrite their rulebooks. Business schools still teach this exact case decades later as the textbook example of what happens when oversight gets sacrificed for short-term results. The single biggest change to come out of it: no one person should ever be allowed to control both the trading desk and the settlement desk at the same time again. That separation of duties principle you'll find embedded in virtually every single bank's internal controls today traces directly back to one 28-year-old trader and one hidden error account. Ordinary Barings employees, regular working people who had absolutely nothing to do with Leeson's trades or decisions, lost their jobs the moment the bank finally collapsed. Some lost real pensions that had been tied up in the firm for many years. The damage never stayed neatly contained to Leeson and his hidden account alone. Leeson's story later became famous enough to be turned into a Hollywood film, Rogue Trader, starring Ewan McGregor, a strange kind of legacy for a collapse that cost thousands of ordinary people their livelihoods. Here's the entire story boiled down to 2 sentences. A 233-year-old bank died because it allowed one employee to both place enormous bets and grade his own homework afterward. And by the time anyone finally checked the actual math, the hole underneath had already grown too deep to climb back out of. So, could something exactly like this happen again? The specific loophole Leeson exploited has largely been closed since. Regulators worldwide now require that separation of duties as standard, non-negotiable practice. But the underlying, repeating pattern underneath all of it, an institution trusting a star performer so much that nobody actually double-checks their work, has shown up again and again in the decades since, just wearing different names and different numbers. Barings wasn't the last bank to learn this hard lesson, and it almost certainly won't be the last one ever to learn it either. If stories like this one, where a single overlooked control failure quietly destroyed something that had survived Napoleon himself, are the kind of thing you want more of, subscribe. Every one of these stories has its own version of account 88888 hiding somewhere inside it. There's a lot more financial history out there where institutions learned these exact same lessons the hard way.